Hi guys, today we're going to travel from Greece over to the mainland of Italy and we're going to talk about Etruscan art. As you see in the map, this area over here on the right hand side, right here, that is kind of this lovely pea green color. This is what would be the area or region that we would call Etruria, also known as present-day Tuscany. If you've ever been to Italy and ever had the privilege of traveling to Tuscany, oh, it's incredibly gorgeous, gorgeous part of Italy. When you look at the map, hopefully you notice that even though this whole area was known as Etruria, it had its own separate city-states, which is kind of funny because it's not a very large area. Of course, that's all relative to us and the fact that we have modes of transportation other than our feet or other than horseback. But it was relatively small. And even though we think about Etruscan art as a single unit, art that was coming out of these different city-states has its own little nuances here and there as well. So important to keep that in mind. They have their own cultural identities. Incredibly enough, almost everything we know about the Etruscan society, Etruscan art, and any kind of societal implications has come from their tombs. They have these really cool kind of underground tombs. If you remember looking at the Tholos or the beehive tombs, from Mycenae in our last unit on Greece, those beehive tombs that are kind of built underground, same kind of thing is happening in Etruria. And they look like just these mounds, as you see in these pictures, these mounds that are kind of underground with a low stone wall. But in fact, when you go into the interior, the stone goes all the way over the ceiling. And they have this beautiful stone corbelling effect. Right? And so these tombs are generally protected from the environment. And so we're fortunate that we have a lot of artwork in these tombs, artifacts in these tombs that has told us a lot about Etruscan society, because we don't have any works of writing or literature until we get to the end of about 100 BCE. And then we have this amazing monumental work by this guy named Vitruvius. And we'll talk about him in a minute. What we know about these tombs, oh my goodness, so much about Etruscan life and society. So let's look inside this tomb. This is the tomb of the triclinium. Tomb of the triclinium. And you might be going, what the heck is a triclinium? A triclinium is literally a stone couch that they would recline upon, right? Kind of laying back. This is kind of a festival or a feast, if you look at the image, which tells us so much about Etruscan society. They did not look at death as something that was gloomy, but rather they looked at death as a celebration of life. It's depicted here in this scene. They have a banqueting hall. They're having a huge banquet. They're dancing. They're having festivities. They're filled with life and joy that the person who is deceased has now gone on to the next life. Also, something I want you to notice about these fresco paintings, and that is male figures in these fresco paintings are rendered in a darker pigment than female figures in this fresco work. Why? You have any idea? Well, if you're thinking about the fact that women had to stay inside and they're emphasizing the domesticity of women, right? Women didn't get outside, didn't work the way that men did. So we're seeing some of these implications that we saw in Minoan art, right? Those frescoes seeing the bull leaper, if you remember that, of the Minoan society, those island societies of Greece. Very much the same stylistic influence that we see here in the tomb of the triclinium. Interesting to know what we do know about Etruscan society, and that is that women were revered and considered equals, that women were allowed to be landowners, very much unlike Greece, right? In Athens, to be a citizen, you had to be a male landowner, but not so in Etruria. Women could be landowners. Women were kind of seen on a parallel plane as men. So that's kind of interesting and different than what we saw in Greek art. Fresco, something you need to know. Fresco painting. What the heck is a fresco painting? Fresco, let me see if I can get rid of that. Oh, it won't go away. I don't know why. Fresco painting is done when they have plaster on the wall. So this is a tomb. This tomb is underground. Oh, sorry about that. They slather plaster on the interior walls, and then they take pigment. Could be iron ore, could be all different kinds of crushed minerals that would turn bright colors when they were crushed. They would mix that up with water, and then they would paint it on the walls in these beautiful, beautiful scenes while the plaster was wet. What happens is the lye and the plaster and the pigment would literally fuse together. So it lasts forever until it crumbles or gets destroyed, which is fascinating. And it's the reason why we have so many of these frescoes left today. Likewise, these are frescoes that have been protected because they're underground, right? They've been free and protected from the elements as well. So 2 vocabulary words: fresco, right? It's this process of painting pigments into wet plaster to make a permanent bond and a permanent artwork; and triclinium, a stone couch to recline upon. Speaking of reclining, oh my goodness, here's a sarcophagus of the spouses. It's Etruscan from 520 BCE. And here's a really cool thing to remember. Etruscan art is almost always, always made out of terracotta. So when you think about terracotta, think about those orange, kind of orangey pots that sit on your back deck. That's terracotta. It's a kind of clay, and it's very porous, and therefore it's absorbing the elements, and it's not very sturdy. Those pots are pretty easy to break, just like this sarcophagus, really easy to break. In fact, this sarcophagus was found in over 400 pieces, and art restoration specialists had to collect all the pieces and fit them back together like this little tiny, or this great big giant puzzle, right? Even the teeny tiny pieces, which it's remarkable that they were able to do this. This scene obviously is depicting a man and a woman, probably husband and wife, very much in this loving embrace. They're kind of sitting forward, but their legs are reclining out to the side. This sarcophagus is about 6.5 feet long by almost 4 feet deep. And interesting to note that Etruscans didn't practice inhumation in their burial, right? Inhumation is and here's a nice vocabulary word for you as well. I bet your parents may not even know what inhumation means. Inhumation means burying the whole person. When somebody dies, burying the whole person. But the Etruscans didn't do that. They practiced cremation. And these sarcophagus would be in the tomb, right? It looks very personified. So you'd walk into the tomb and there's this depiction of a husband and wife. But inside this sarcophagus would be the burial remains, the cremated remains of the entire familial grouping, from grandparents, oftentimes to cousins, to children. So all of them were basically buried together in the same tomb. This was found at a necropolis. Necropolis is one of your vocabulary words, and it literally means city of the dead, not Acropolis, like we learned in Athens, right? The Acropolis, high city, city on a rock, but the necropolis, city of the dead. So tomb after tomb after tomb, mostly referencing specific familial burial sites. When you look at these, again, very much kind of lifelike. Do you notice something similar about their faces that we see in Greek sculptures? They look very familiar, don't they? They're surprisingly lifelike, and they tend to be more naturalized than the rigid, archaic Greek sculptures that we're looking at. All right, moving on to the next slide. Oh, I wanted to just show you some close-up images of these, right? You can really tell that they're thinking about these hands are extending into space instead of being rigid and next to their sides like we see in the archaic sculptures of Greece, but much more they're reaching through space towards something. Most people believe that the hands would have been at one time holding something. Remember, kind of like the Peplos Kore, right? Remember, her arm is broken off, but at one point they believed that she was holding some sort of platter that people could put their offerings on for Athena. Same thing here. These hands are extended in such a fashion that it only begs to reason that they were originally holding something. All right. Now, back to that idea of don't these look familiar? Hopefully you have placed so far this smile as being extremely similar to the archaic smile that we're seeing in ancient sculpture from Greece, right? And when you think about it, even Mona Lisa kind of has this archaic smile, right? It's like the cat that ate the canary almost. All right, looking at Etruscan temples. How are they different than Greek temples and how are they similar? Well, this is a quintessential Etruscan temple. And what you should know is we have no idea um, in actuality if this is the correct formation, the exact formation of an Etruscan temple. This is a reconstruction that's based on these amazing writings by an architect and philosopher by the name of Vitruvius. And so let's look at the way that they might be different and the way they might be similar to Greek temples. Etruscan temples were not made out of stone. They were not made out of marble or granite, but rather they're made out of mud brick. They're made out of mud brick and wood. So the roof would have been wood. The columns would have been wood. Well, what's the problem with mud brick and wood? Oh my gosh, they're so impervious to the elements, namely fire, right? Imagine if you have incense burning and you have an open flame, it only begs to reason, or even during battle, right? It's only begs to reason that they're going to be very easy to destroy. And such is the case. There's not one surviving Etruscan temple in Etruria, in Tuscany. And so this was a reconstructed piece. On top of this temple, oddly enough, this temple would have had all of the god sculptures on the roof. All of them would have been life-size up on the roof, and there would have been some sort of narrative. So these god sculptures would have been, sculpture of the gods would have been up there engaged in some sort of pose that told a story to the viewers below. When you're thinking about, it has a pediment, remember that's that triangle piece, but there's no sculpture in the interior of the pediment and no sculpture on that piece that goes right over the top, the architrave or the frieze, no sculptural frieze like we see in Greek temples. Also, the columns, they're completely smooth. Greek columns tend to be fluted. Fluted means, right, they kind of go like this, kind of right around the outside. And nice sound effect, huh? But these were totally smooth, and they most closely mimic the Doric order. It's called a Tuscan order, but it really, when you look at them, they're very plain. They don't have ornate capitals at the top. So most art historians would liken these to the Doric order that is found in Greek temple sculpture. It only has really two different parts in an Etruscan temple. It has the pronaos. Remember, pro means to come before, and pro-naos. Naos is a synonym for cella, which is also sanctuary, right? So it has this porch, this pronaos, that has a double colonnade, and then right behind it, it has a triple cella. So 3 different sanctuaries. However, these cellas never housed a deity. In fact, Etruscan worship was such that they would go out into nature. They didn't believe that a god could be contained in a building. They believed that they would go out into nature, find a beautiful place, and commune with the gods, that they felt most connected to the gods in natural surroundings and not in man-made objects. They would just pay homage to the gods, homage, if you will, by having these rooftop sculptures. And that's what we see here. So 3 cellas that were really just this place of protection. And then they would often have, on the pronaos, they would have big dishes that were full of incense burning. And often on the pronaos, people would also leave different kind of sacrifices to the god. And when I say sacrifices or penances, right, they would leave fruit and they would leave money and they would leave, or, jewels, those kinds of things. I'm not talking about like sacrificial animals or sacrificial people. Etruscans didn't do that. All right. So here's the place that sculpture would have been. And this is the sculpture that came from the temple of Minerva. And he is actually reconstructed as well. put together like puzzle pieces. He too is made out of terracotta. So when you're thinking about Greek sculpture, Greek god sculpture, they're made out of stone, right? Almost all made out of marble, oftentimes out of granite, but not the Etruscans. Etruscans are not using steel tools, most historians believe. And so this will also determine why or how they're creating their artwork. They're using materials that are indigenous to them. They're digging up the earth, they're mixing it with water and lye, and they're forming things out of clay. So Apollo here is made out of terracotta. We are not exactly sure how his arms would have been. His arms were not found, but it definitely looks like it was extended outward. Yeah, and there you have it. Oh, these also, the whole temple and temple sculpture, rooftop sculpture would have been brightly, brightly painted, just like the Greek temples would have been brightly painted, which is crazy. I can imagine painting this bright white, sparkling Parthenon, and there were very gaudy colors because of the pigments that were available to them then, right? So these would have been painted the same way. This guy's life size, 5 foot 11 inches tall. So when you're looking at that in context, that temple is a big temple to have these little guys, or what looks like little guys, up on top. I want you to notice something also. They would often use a stone base that they would elaborately decorate. They still needed structural support to get these sculptures to stand up, right? Didn't quite understand balance. But when you look at him, even though, he is somewhat idealized, there are some things about him as well that are quite natural. He's got a forward moving stance. He's showing human movement, even though he's got that strange archaic smile and all the sculptural faces look the same. There are definitely things that individualize him. So how in the world did we know about Etruscan temples? This guy, Vitruvius, wrote this monumental work documenting art and architecture called De Architecture. And he even made a canon for human proportion. He also had many drawings for pulleys and things like early technological advancements that they might have used in architectural construction. And because he recorded it and wrote it down, this is how we know almost everything we know about Etruscan architecture. By the way, a side note, they do believe that there are architectural remains still yet to be unearthed. But what happens is when one society crumbles, instead of removing all of that, literally, they would just build right on top of it. So there are probably lots of architectural works that are underneath existing houses and civic buildings and public spaces all around Tuscany. All right, Vitruvius he's really quite timeless. The writings that he includes in this written work go on to be monumentally impactful for Leonardo da Vinci. And I'll go back one. If you look at Vitruvius right here, his depiction of human proportion, he's got it all gridded out. Everything is mathematically laid out. And when you look at Leonardo da Vinci, right, this Vitruvian man that's very, very, very famous, was inspired by Vitruvius himself. How appropriate, Vitruvian man. All right, I want to end today. This is the end of Etruscan art. Tomorrow we'll move on into Rome, but I wanted to show you the Capitoline wolf and tell you a little Greek mythology surrounding the Capitoline wolf. If you ever have the chance to be in Rome, the Capitoline wolf is really everywhere. Like, I found myself not being really conscious, and then all of a sudden I would look up and see this wolf embedded in stone on the side of a building, kind of carved or impressed into the stone sidewalk or cobblestone. And what in the world is this Capitoline wolf all about? And why are there two human children underneath this she-wolf? All right, so here's the story. And this is how the Capitoline wolf has come to be known as the symbol of Rome. There was a guy named King Numido, and he has this brother named Amulius. And Amulius did not want Numido to be king. There was sibling rivalry. And so he decides to wage war against his brother, the rightful king. And he captures his brother, takes over control of the kingdom, throws his brother into jail. His brother, King Numido, did not have any male offspring. He only had one daughter named Sylvia. And so her uncle, who has now taken his place as king, he takes Sylvia and he puts her far away in a temple and tells her that she's now going to be punishes her by making her become what was known as a Vestal Virgin. It's a priestess, right? She was to remain celibate for her entire life. However, the god Mars was infatuated with Sylvia. And the god Mars is, oh my goodness, the god of war. So he pretty much gets what he wants. Lo and behold, they have a romance, and Sylvia becomes pregnant with twin sons. Well, as you can imagine, Amulius is enraged. He's furious because he knows that not only are these two sons going to be the offspring of the rightful king, King Numido, but that they're the offspring of the god of war. He doesn't stand a chance if these babies survive. So Amulius charges the midwife with throwing these babies into the river. But the midwife had such compassion on these little infant children that she fashions a basket out of reeds and places these infant sons into this basket and sends them down the river. Does this sound familiar? If any of you know the story of Moses, it might sound familiar. Lo and behold, a shepherd. So this is where the Capitoline wolf comes in. The basket comes to land on the side of downstream, many, many miles. And here are these babies in this basket. They can't fend for themselves. They can't feed themselves. But this she-wolf comes upon them. And instead of eating these babies, she adopts them as her own children. She nurses them to sustain them and give them life. And as she is nursing them and nurturing them, sometime later, a shepherd comes upon them and finds the infant boys and takes them under his wing. They grow up and they realize their lineage because this story is going around, right? This urban legend about these twin boys, and they are really the sons of King Numido, and they're really the rightful heirs of the throne. So the two boys, named Romulus and Remus, are standing on the edge of the river one day, deciding to take their proper place and start their kingdom. And they have an argument over which one of them was born first, which one is the rightful heir to the throne. And so as they stand there, Remus all of a sudden looks up and sees 6 vultures flying overhead. And he's like, look, it's a sign of the gods. I am the one who is supposed to be the rightful king. But moments later, above the head of Romulus, there are 12 vultures. And of course, Romulus says, I have got 12 vultures above my head and you only have 6, so the gods are looking upon me. Well, sibling rivalry ensues, just like their grandfather and his brother. And they get into this massive massive fight. And lo and behold, before they were done, Romulus had killed Remus. So Romulus goes on to take one of these hills as he's looking across the countryside, and he establishes his kingdom that he names after himself. And he calls it Rome. And that's how Rome got its name, from Romulus. So that's the story of Romulus and Remus and the foundations of the Roman Empire, if you will. All right, so I'll leave you with that and one more little piece of art. This is known as a transitional piece, if you will, and it's Ole Matele. And why it's transitional is even though it is considered by early art historians, as they start looking at it, they're like, this is definitely a Roman sculpture. This is not an Etruscan sculpture. But they found on the hem of his garment, in the Etruscan language, they had their own language, that they found this Etruscan writing that has his name. So this is Ole Matele. He is kind of this crossover between Etruscan art and Roman art. And we're going to see so much more art kind of in this style as opposed to the Etruscan style or the archaic style when we move on into Rome. Oh, by the way, this hand outward is known as the orator's stance. If you know what an orator is, it's somebody that's addressing the public, right? It's an oration. His hand is up, and this also is going to be something that we see as we move on in to Roman art and architecture. All right. Make sure that you do your vocabulary page today. And tomorrow, we're going to move on into Rome and look at some amazingly monumental inventions like concrete and the arch. And we're going to see how it amazingly thrusts society and innovation forward. Okay, that's it. Have a great day, you guys. I will see you tomorrow.